My name is Christine. Good afternoon, folks. My name is Christine Kirby. I am the Assistant Commissioner for the Bureau of Air and Waste, and thank you for attending our meeting, our virtual community meeting on the Massachusetts Clean Heat Standard. With me today are Will Space, Emily Lamb, and Josh Cook of the Climate Strategies Group. And before we get started, I want to thank everyone who has engaged in this process. We've had a great turnout and received lots of comments and had lots of people on these calls, which has been really helpful as we move toward finishing up our stakeholder process and get towards the work of putting out a draft regulation on the Clean Heat Standard. So we'll talk about our schedule in a little more detail going forward. But before we get to that, I'm going to turn to Emily for the logistics for today's meeting. Emily?
Sure, thanks. So like we mentioned, the meeting is being recorded, and to minimize background noise, all attendees are on mute. We'd ask that you stay on mute throughout the presentation. If you haven't already, could you please enter your full name and an affiliation if relevant? You can do that in the participants panel. If you need to rename yourself, you can click on the participants icon and then over your name, select the option to rename. And then there will also be opportunities for comments and questions in the latter half of this meeting. So if you'd like to ask a question or provide a comment, you can raise your hand. The raise your hand function is on the bottom right of the participants panel. And when it's your turn, we'll notify you and ask you to unmute yourself so you can make your comment or ask your question. And you can also put comments or questions in the chat if you want, although it's helpful to us if you wait until we're done with the presentation to start putting things into the chat. I'll hand it back to Christine.
Great, thanks, Emily. This is a quick overview of our agenda. We already heard from Emily on the logistics and updates. After a refresher on the Clean Heat Standard, we're going to review the comments that we received during the fall and the winter on the various documents and presentations that we have either sent or delivered via a virtual meeting. We're also going to present some program design options based on the comments we have received so far. And I'll just caveat, we have not made final decisions, and we are just taking into account of all the comments that we've received as we move towards proposing the regulation, hopefully later this year. And last but not least, we'll leave plenty of time for questions. Next slide. So we wanted to go over where we've been and where we're going. This is where we've been from the calendar years 2021 through 2023. In 2021, the Clean Heat Commission was formed under Executive Order 596, and that kicked off a process where the Commission was considering how to address the heating sector and meet our decarbonization goals. And then in 2022, there was the development of the Clean Energy and Climate Plan for 2025 in the summer. That was published. Following that, the Clean Energy and Climate Plan for 2050 was published. And then following that, there was a Clean Heat Commission report published based on the work that was done by the Commission. Will Space from DEP, who's with us today, he was part of that commission or part of the staff task force advising the Clean Heat Commission. And all of that great work led to where we went in 2023. So MassDEP, because we were tasked as the lead agency for the Clean Heat Standard, in the spring of 2023, we released a discussion document on the Clean Heat Standard, or what a Clean Heat Standard could look like. We also released a discussion draft on a heating fuels reporting requirement. It's a really important part of the Clean Heat Standard to make sure that we're getting information in from heating fuels emissions as we design the program. And we asked for a comment. We had a comment period, the deadline of May 1st, so we got lots of comments on that. And in the summer, we had a comment deadline on various documents, including the Clean Heat discussion document. And in the fall, we issued a Clean Heat Standard draft framework. And that was really building upon all of the comments that we received from you folks and others, and laid out our thinking on what a Clean Heat Standard will ultimately look like as we move towards the proposed regulation. We also released a voluntary early registration program discussion draft. We had a virtual community meeting on that, or a technical meeting on that. And we asked for comments on that by December 21st, and other documents. So again, we received lots of documents. So that's where we've been. At a later point in this meeting, we'll talk about where we're going for the rest of 2024. So with that, I will turn it over to Will.
Thanks, Christine, and thanks everybody for joining us. And I'll just describe what I'm going to talk about now is sort of where we are. So we're in the process of trying to design a clean heat standard program. And we have spent some time at previous meetings talking about, in general, what a clean heat standard is. And the basic concept here is we're talking about a regulation from the Department of Environmental Protection that would require heating energy suppliers, which would include heating oil, propane, natural gas, and electricity, to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions over time, and rely on a crediting program to demonstrate compliance and the emission reductions. And so the document that we published most recently, and the important one, is our draft framework. And the draft framework, we laid out what the basic concepts in a clean heat standard regulation might need to be, and we described how we might set the standard, meaning how much clean heat is needed across the strait, who we might regulate, and what we might require them to do, how credits might be generated, and that gets at sort of what is defined as clean heat, and then also includes compliance, flexibility, and revenue. And I'll mention that equity is not a separate item on this slide because there are various equity-related provisions throughout the framework, so we can really build in the concept to the program from the beginning. Next slide. So just as a reminder of where this process has been and how we've been running it. So this is what we're calling a virtual community meeting. We've tried to provide a regular schedule of these every month or so. Content geared toward a general audience, and also tried to have evening sessions, which we will have today, where those evening sessions are really geared toward a more general audience that may not be as interested in going through all the technical detail, but might want to keep track of what's going on in the program in general. We've also had a separate stream of meetings that we call technical sessions, where we really delve into some specific topical issues, and that process is ongoing. We're in one of those meetings now. And as noted on this slide, and I keep trying to remember to say all the time, we are open for comments and questions to our Climate Strategies email address anytime on any subject. Next slide. So we recently revamped our website. We've produced a lot of material, and it was getting to be a long list. So this has helped me a lot, for one, to find our materials. We've tried to put the framework information, including the actual framework, a key slide, and then a link to our technical presentation where we try and explain what's in the framework kind of front and center on the web page, and then put links to the other materials. We've also posted some additional meeting materials today, including some updates to our frequently asked questions document. I'll talk a little bit more about one of the key updates later on. Also a new discussion document on commercial and industrial crediting. We've had some questions about that. And then finally, the comments and the summaries of the comments are newly posted on our website, in addition to the slides for this meeting. Next slide. So back to Christine.
Okay, thanks, Will. So we talked about where we've been, and this is where we have been in 2024 and where we're going. Just to review that, in January 5th, we proposed our draft heating fuels emission reporting regulation. We did receive quite a bit of comments on that. And the comment deadline for that was February 23rd. So we're looking at all those comments. And we will be considering all those comments as we move towards finalizing that regulation. We also had a comment period deadline for the voluntary early registration program discussion draft, and that was February 16th. We're also looking at those comments. Moving on to the spring, we are, well, it says spring, but we just released it. The first thing is release discussion document on commercial and industrial building crediting. And that was released in the winter, but it's a little bit of a typo, but it is out for your review and comment. There'll be a final written comment deadline for the informal stakeholder process. And I want to just note that there'll be an email coming out next week with a little more detail on the next steps there, so stay tuned. And then in the fall, we are working towards finalizing the fuel emissions reporting regulation based on the comments that I talked about earlier for the draft reg that was released earlier this year. And the big thing that we're trying to do is move towards proposing the comprehensive clean heat standard regulation so that we can get to the implementation phase of it, which will bring us the emission reductions in line with the Clean Energy and Climate Plan. So that's where we're going. And again, stay tuned for an email next week that'll give you a little more detail on the schedule. Well,
great. So I'm going to start off the first substantive part of our meeting before I turn it over to Emily, which is about the comments that we received over the fall and winter of most recently. So next slide. So as a reminder, we went through a comment process late last year on the comment on the framework where we had a comment deadline in December. And what we're doing now is reporting out on kind of the comments that we received during that deadline and a little bit after. Want to just flag also, we've had a series of comment deadlines for the clean heat standard. As Christine mentioned, we're sort of trying to wind down the informal stakeholder comment process. So this will be in the email you'll get next week, but we're looking to have a kind of a final deadline in early April for the comment period. Before I turn it over to Emily, I just want to mention that we hope that our efforts to provide written and oral summaries of the comments received are helpful to people in thinking through the concepts we're sharing and that sort of thing. But we think we're doing well, and Emily's doing a great job of describing them. But of course, we can't really do justice to everything everybody says. We are reading, the very detailed comments and taking a lot of time to look through them. We're just sharing some initial high-level themes here, just to update people on what we're receiving. So with that, I'll turn it over to Emily.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to talk about the comments in order of the framework sections and give a quick reminder for each of these sections of what's in the framework before I talk about some themes from the comments themselves. So first topic is setting the standard. So the draft framework includes separate standards for full electrification projects, and that includes a low-income carve-out and then an annual emission reduction requirement that will be met by using clean heat. So we can go to the next slide to talk about what we heard in the comments. So we heard some general comments about the basis for setting those standards and goals that the standards could be designed to achieve. For example, net zero by 2050 or setting target carbon intensity scores for fuels. On the full electrification standard, there were comments supporting the full electrification requirement concept for the residential sector, as well as some comments opposing this concept or questioning the need for it. There were also suggestions to develop a similar full electrification concept for the non-residential sector, so for commercial and industrial buildings. On the equity carve-out, we received comments suggesting that we expand the scope of the types of residences that would be eligible for this carve-out, so to include other types of households, such as moderate income, to potentially use geographic identifiers of disadvantaged communities or households in large multifamily buildings. We also received comments talking about the size of the carve-out and how to potentially implement protections for renters or low-income consumers within the standards. Finally, on the emissions reduction standards, most of the comments focused on the stringency, so how much emissions reductions we needed, and then the timing of those requirements, so how those would phase in over time. So the next section of the framework is on the regulated heating energy suppliers. So this is which companies would be required to meet the standards. The framework includes annual requirements for the suppliers of electricity, natural gas, heating oil, and propane. And these requirements phase in over time, and they shift over time on more and more onto the electric sector as more and more customers electrify. So in terms of what we heard in the comments, and I do just want to reiterate what Will said at the start, that this is very high level summary and doesn't, encapsulate all the nuance that's in the comments that we received, but those are up on the website. So for electricity suppliers, we received comments discussing the pace and the method of how the compliance obligation could shift from fuel suppliers to the electric sector over time. We also received comments requesting additional rationale or explanation about why there is an obligation on the electric sector. And relatedly, a lot of comments raising the concern that increasing the price of electricity is counterproductive to incentivizing building electrification. Next, on municipal light plants, we received comments focused specifically on this part of the electric sector. So we received comments questioning MassDEP's legal authority to regulate the MLPs under a clean heat standard. And then also some comments that supported including MLPs as obligated entities in the clean heat standard if there's an obligation on electricity. For the delivered fuel suppliers, so that's the suppliers of propane, natural gas, and fuel oil, comments focused on logistic challenges and the technical complexities of regulating these companies and that these companies might face in complying with the clean heat standard. So next we can talk about credit generation, and as in our previous rounds of stakeholder feedback, this is a topic that's of high interest to our stakeholders, so we received a lot of comment on this. The framework, as a reminder, limits crediting to electrification and liquid biofuels at the start of the program, and then includes this program review in 2028 that would specifically look at revising the eligibility based on specific criteria. And for the full electrification standard, that is limited to residences that install electric heat pumps that are capable of meeting 100% of the space heating needs of the home. So we can move on to the next slide. So in terms of the comments that we heard on the full electrification crediting, we heard sort of two different perspectives on how to handle electric heat pumps that have fossil fuel backups. Some commenters suggesting that those should be allowed for full electrification, and others that those should not, no sort of fossil fuel backup system should be allowed for residents to receive a full electrification credit. And we also received comments suggesting that other appliances should be part of the full electrification crediting scheme. So, for example, heat pump water heaters, induction stoves, or clothes dryers. For the emissions reductions credits, we, in the framework, included a simplifying assumption of assigning 5 metric tons of emissions reduction credits per residence. We received a lot of questions and concerns about that assumption, both about the concept of using a default number per residence to assign emissions reductions credits, and about whether 5 metric tons is the right number itself. And as we heard in previous rounds of stakeholder comment, we also heard from stakeholders, a group of stakeholders, that the clean heat standard should not ignore the carbon intensity of electricity generation when determining emissions reduction crediting. So also continuing on credit generation, we received comments that talked about how MassDEP should determine the eligibility of different fuels and technologies. As we've heard in prior rounds of comments as well, there continues to be support for a technology neutral clean heat standard. So it would be a clean heat standard that would allow crediting for anything that reduces emissions, as well as support for the electrification goals that are included in the framework. In general, commenters agreed that life cycle greenhouse gas emissions should be part of the consideration for eligibility for different fuels and technologies. And then we also received comments suggesting other metrics that we might want to consider or use in making these determinations, such as health impacts. We also received comments about the timing and the frequency with which we should be evaluating fuels and technologies for eligibility to generate credits under the clean heat standard. We heard a lot of comments about specific fuels and technologies that either should or should not be included in the clean heat standard. And these include weatherization and energy efficiency, hybrid heating systems, water heaters and other electric appliances, fossil propane and renewable propane, renewable gaseous fuels like RNG and hydrogen, and then also other fuels and technologies. We couldn't fit everything on the slide, but for example, advanced wood heating and combined heat and power. And then we also received feedback on specific verification measures that MassDEP should consider, and then some questions and concerns and recommendations about CHETS, which is an online platform that MassDEP would create that would be used to track, to generate and track the clean heat credits themselves. So this is the final section of the framework, which is about compliance, flexibility, and revenue. So the framework includes credit banking, an alternative compliance payment option, which would allow regulated entities to make a payment rather than getting credits themselves. And then a just transition fee concept on the initial sale of certain credits where the revenue will be used to support equitable outcomes. So we received comments, quite a few comments on the alternative compliance payments and where revenue might be used. So we received comments about the dollar amounts of the alternative compliance payments that are set out in the framework for the different types of credits, requests for additional quantitative analysis about ACP levels and how those should be set, questions about how the ACP would be collected and how those funds should be used. So both questions about how they'd be used and suggestions for how they should be used. And then for the just transition fee in general, commenters were supportive of this concept and had suggestions or requests for detail about how that revenue should be used. We also received a lot of comment about MassSave and other programs that could potentially align or interact with the clean heat standard. So commenters raised the potential for interaction with the existing MassSave program, particularly the whole home electrification rebates, and including alignment with the emissions and equity targets and the concept of stacking incentives. We also received comments with concerns about how the clean heat standard will coordinate with existing and upcoming state and federal programs. And in this last section, I'm just going to talk about some themes from the comments that are not specifically about the framework, but that we did want to mention in this presentation. So we continue to receive a lot of comments about economic impacts, particularly about operational affordability of heat pumps and ways that we can financially support customers in the clean heat transition. Also a lot of comments about the costs of electrification for existing and new buildings. So I received comments about complementary or alternative policies like a fossil fuel surcharge, carbon pricing more generally, an electric heat pump rate, or an appliance standard for heat pump water heaters that MassDEP could consider. And then we continued to receive comments with concerns about the electric grid's ability to support widespread electrification and other grid issues, and then questions and concerns about potential impacts on small businesses and the workforce. And so I think with that, I'll hand it over to Will.
Great, thanks, Emily. And we hope that was helpful. Again, if you want to know more about the comments received, there is posted on the webpage both a number of pages of summary, written summary of those comments, and then the actual comments are in an even larger PDF. So you can access those things on our webpage. And we continue to consider all those comments, and we welcome additional comments. And we haven't made any final decisions here. We do have an on comment process. We have a number of comments that we received over the time, and we will continue to consider those. You don't need to resubmit things you've submitted before. But we have been looking at the comments, and we've identified, a lot of things that might change in a proposed regulation from what we put forward in the framework, but also some particular things that we've been trying to think through that might address some of the concerns we have internally, and also the things that stakeholders have been pointing out. So I'm going to talk through a couple of items here that we're particularly interested in sort of hearing more feedback over the next month or so, and just kind of update you on some of our thinking. But as again, I want to be clear that these are not necessarily the only changes they certainly aren't the only changes we're thinking about. And they're not decisions. They're just things we're looking for input on. The other thing I'll just point out is that there is some written documentation of what I'm going to talk about now on what's numbered as Q0 in the frequently asked questions document. We wanted to give you a little bit of written material on this to react to. The frequently asked questions seemed a good place to put it. We didn't want to put it at the end because that might cause problems if we started adding things. So we put it at the beginning so you can go to the frequently asked question, and then the first thing you get to is a list of the things I'm going to talk about now. So if I could move on to the first of these items. So we have a couple of items here that I'm going to share that have to do with kind of realigning the crediting quantities around the fact that the clean heat standard framework really just focused on the space heating part of the energy demand. And again, the crediting process and the other parts of the framework are not designed to be extremely precise numbers, but just to give a general simplified crediting scheme that we can use to account for clean heat. And when we proposed in the draft framework was that a full electrification of a residence we would count as 5 metric tons of emission reductions, because that's kind of the average emissions from a home that's heated by natural gas or oil in Massachusetts. We got a lot of comments about maybe kind of leaving room in the system for thinking about adding or somehow dealing with water heating. And so one thing we're thinking about now is whether we should, not give that full 5 metric tons, but just 4 metric tons per residence, or it could be some other number, and scale down the partial electrification part of it too, just to make the accounting scheme a little more consistent with what stakeholders have observed. So that's one of several items we're going to talk about. And again, we know we may have questions about that. As Emily mentioned, if you can hold those into the chat until we finish, that'd be appreciated. And we'll stop and take time for questions and comments. Next slide. So the next topic we're thinking about is in the same category. If we change the crediting to sort of account for the not complete applicability of the clean heat standard as we've thought about it, we need to lower the kind of total reductions achieved. And then another thing we're thinking about is instead of the way we conceived of it in the framework is that if you install a clean heat system, you can continue to generate these ongoing emission reduction credits that are associated with operating the system for the entire life of the program. And that seemed like maybe more that was necessary and a bigger crediting scheme than we needed. So we're also thinking of the credits as being something that you could only do for 5 years at a particular address. And what that would do is would allow us to keep the total amount of credits constant once the program is ramped up. Wouldn't really change the total amount of reductions because we'd still put the same number of systems through the accounting scheme over time. So these are written up in a little more detail in the FAQ, and are really just to align the crediting scheme a little bit better with the coverage of the clean heat standard, and also to avoid the kind of really what might be a cost impact implications, or at least sustainability implementations of sort of committing to credit these systems over the full period through 2050. So that's the first two ideas there. The third one is about the regulation of heating energy suppliers, and what the question of when to regulate electricity sellers and when and how. So electricity sellers are subject to the full electrification standard, and we've talked about calibrating that, but that's still our thinking from the beginning. But there's a separate part of the standard called the emission reduction standard that was not going to start for electricity sellers until 2031. And we hear some commenters saying that maybe is too early. So we're thinking about delaying it until 2035 is the idea we've put out there. So we're interested in comments on that, or we're updating you. That's something we're thinking about. Next slide. So another one we've worked hard on is how to deal with liquid biofuels. The draft framework actually covers liquid biofuels, including waste-based and also other biofuels available for the renewable fuel standard. I think the slide there might be missing that part of it. But we've been thinking about just some limits to make sure that we're capturing, what we're really trying to do here is capture what's actually going on in the fuel system in Massachusetts right now with the biofuels that are being used in Massachusetts, which are generally lower blends. And so we're thinking about limiting the credit of biofuels in the case of the fuels that are not waste-based to B20 blends and to not credit the renewable diesel product. And I won't go into a lot of technical detail about that. But basically, those are a couple things that aren't currently in widespread use. And we want to maybe think about not incentivizing a lot of new investment in that unless it can be done with waste feedstocks, which we think have a long-term future. You may remember we're talking about phasing out the crediting of non-waste-based feedstocks after 2030, so we would avoid sort of new investments in that part of the landscape for now. Next slide. So the next thing is these creditings, part of the crediting scheme we're talking about as far as the usage of electric heat pumps, where we think it's useful to give an incentive, an ongoing incentive to customers to encourage the usage of installed heat pumps and reward that usage. And in the framework, we talk about how those credits would be handled basically by the electricity consumer. We're thinking about changing that a little bit so that the electrical suppliers would really be the ones that would be in that credit market. And that would create a little bit more symmetry between the way the other source of those credits, the fuel suppliers, are treated under the framework, so that they're all those credits are coming from the heating energy supplier, and that might have administrative benefits as far as keeping track of the credit creation and trading, and also market functioning kind of benefits. Next slide. So we got a lot of comments about the just transition fee and the applicability of it. And this one is really talking about which of the credit creation or really transfers would trigger this just transition fee, which is a fee that happens when the full electrification projects are created in the system. And so what we were thinking of doing is having the just transition fee apply a little more narrowly that's in the framework. The framework said it would apply to anyone that's not eligible for the low income electric rates, but we might refine that a little bit to identify or exclude certain communities or home sizes or other equity criteria. So it's a little more targeted. So we've heard that comment. Next slide. And the last one we just want to make sure we speak to, and again, as I said, these are written up in the FAQ, we'll find them at Q0, is we're very conscious of the need to be compatible with the MassSAVE program, which is currently crediting heat pumps and also doing great work on weatherization and so forth. So there's a couple of aspects in there that we're looking at. These are all actually mentioned in the draft framework or other documents as things that we've already looked to MassSAVE, and we continue to look to MassSAVE as the 3-year plan process goes on to refine these. So one of them is basically the requirements for the full electrification projects and the process for dealing with those, so we don't create any confusion or conflicts for people that may be eligible for both programs. And then also we were clear, going back to the original discussion document, that some of the options around program stringency and alternative compliance payment levels were come up with in the first place with reference to the MassSAVE program. So we may look back to that as we start to refine things. So next slide. So those are the sort of new ideas I wanted to mention. I realize that's a pretty quick summary. As I said, there's some additional written information on the website page, and we can take questions after that. Just to recap the sort of meeting here and the basic where we are, we've released the framework. Got a lot of comments. We're still working on considering all of them, and there are many potential changes that might happen before we propose regulations. Haven't made any decision, and we're happy with additional comments. So I realize people are just hearing some things today for the first time, and this was intended for an update. So we may not have a lot of comments at this meeting, but we're happy to open up now for questions or comments on the clean heat standard, and we're happy to unmute people or have you put questions or comments in the chat.
Chris Brennan, in the fall of 2023 commentary period, it was noted that there were over 1,000 letters from Massachusetts homeowners expressing their concerns about the clean heat standard. I see that in the latest commentary summary post there are a growing number, 2,500 plus. How much weight, if any, does DEP give these 3,500 comments, especially in light of their numbers and volume? How does DEP plan to address these in the future? Thank you.
So I can start with that. So we certainly are welcoming all comments. We've said that throughout the process, and we do appreciate all the comment letters that have come in from the homeowners. And we are trying to design the program so that we don't create undue hardships on homeowners. We'll refer to some of the equity measures we're building in. I am wondering whether the question revolves around many of the comments that came in about the use of bioheat, which we are building in some crediting for biofuels, as Will mentioned.
Carrie Katan, I've asked you to unmute.
Hello. Yeah, thank you so much for holding this event. My question is on your changes around what liquid fuels would qualify. I definitely think the changes you're proposing are in the right direction. I have a question if renewable diesel is being taken off the table, which I think was one of my takeaways, and I think is a great idea because, yeah, as you said, it's not very common in Massachusetts, and we shouldn't make it common. I'm just wondering why wouldn't that apply to renewable propane, given they're both not common in Massachusetts, made in similar ways, often at similar plants, and often also involve crop-based biofuels instead of waste-based biofuels.
Yeah, I think we should mostly just take that as a comment and observe that I think the thinking that's applying to heating oil will inform our thinking about propane also, and we're certainly aware of the need to think through that for both of those fuels. So thank you.
On the renewable propane issue, we have heard from folks from the propane industry, and I think one of the things that we were waiting for was more information from that industry. So I'll just throw that out there if anyone from the propane industry is going to submit comments on that. We certainly welcome it. Thank you.
Stephen Cowell, I've asked you to unmute.
Okay, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just am missing a point. Maybe it has been given, but the question is the flow of dollars. Where do dollars go? Either the cost of the credits or cashing in the credits, or who pays for them and who gets money for them? What is the dollar flow associated with the clean heat standard? I'm sort of missing it, and maybe it's just something that I've missed. I've tried to read it, but maybe I missed it. I apologize if that's true. Who pays for those credits? How much do they pay? Who decides? And is there a market that will be cashing in those credits? And et cetera, et cetera. These are just, I just asking these questions. Sorry if there's clear answers that I should have read.
I think that's a good question. Should I take a shot at it first, Christine?
Yeah, please do.
So just it's always good to step back, I think, and it's a good question that we haven't actually had posed as much as we might have. I think that the basic thing to think about is that we would be requiring the heating energy suppliers to demonstrate that the crediting is happening by holding the credits, and they could, in some cases, somehow sort of create the credits themselves. So you could picture a heating oil company that also sold heat pumps, encouraging their customers to make a conversion, or maybe some of the kind of things that go in within the MassSave programs now would be in that category. But the more probably other way to think about it is that these companies will need to purchase credits. So you could think about crediting happening as people operate a heat pump or fund an installer to put in a heat pump, and that creates a credit that can then can be sold to one of the compliance entities, and so that ability to sell that credit creates an incentive for the clean heat company to offer a little bit lower price to their customer for the clean heat work, because they are able to sell that credit, and that economic incentive is designed to make the clean heat more widespread. The basic model is similar to what happens for rooftop solar installations in Massachusetts, where there's a requirement on some of the energy suppliers to actually purchase credits that represent an accounting of the clean heat that happens on solar panels. We're also, aware of the need to do more work on sort of analyzing the impacts of the program, and that is certainly going to be a part of our process as we think through the move from the framework to proposed regulations.
And there's another part of the program that is part of the flexibility mechanisms, which is building in an alternative compliance payment that we see in other programs. So we're thinking about how that revenue that would come in ostensibly to the Commonwealth could be deployed to meet our equity and just transition goals. So that's another way that some of the money will be flowing.
Yeah, and I guess I should mention, since the question did focus on the money part of it also, we would, in that process of creating some of those credits where they're happening at a site that doesn't necessarily have an equity benefit toward our equity goals, there would be what we're calling a just transition fee associated with the transfer of that credit, and that funding in particular would be used to help make sure the program achieves the equity goals that Christine mentioned.
June Wooding, I'm sorry, I missed what we were commenting on by April 5th. Are you developing an updated framework to circulate for comment by that deadline, or are we setting in comments based on this meeting?
Good question. I think I'm glad you asked to clarify that. I think that we don't think most people probably need to do anything by that deadline, because you may have already made the comments that you'd like to make. But if anything, at this meeting or the upcoming industrial commercial crediting meeting makes you feel like you'd like to, we've said we've had an open comment period where people can comment anytime. We're just kind of announcing that we'd like to get any last comments people have by that deadline. So the answer is, aside from what we've released today, we're not anticipating releasing any additional information before that deadline, or even before we propose a regulation necessarily.
Stephen Sack, I've asked you to unmute.
Yes, thank you. Can I ask a couple questions? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. How are you guys viewing the biofuels in the APS program going forward with the clean heat standards?
So just to be clear, there's sort of two parts in the clean heat standard. One is the crediting for the biofuels that are eligible for the APS, which is the waste-based biofuels. And we are, in communication with our Department of Energy Resources, which runs that program, to think about how the two programs can be compatible. As I said earlier, MassSave is another example where there's kind of overlap there. with another state program, and we're very aware of the need to, make sure that the programs are not in conflict and are compatible as we go forward. I don't have anything to share beyond that, but it's certainly something we're focused on.
Are you looking at, both programs are going to run at the same time?
Well, just to give an example, and I certainly don't mean to imply this would happen, MassDEP runs a clean energy standard program that includes some of the same clean energy that's eligible under Mass DOER's renewable portfolio standard. And those two programs do run together, but basically sort of compliance with one of them counts toward compliance with the other. That model isn't a simple one-to-one translation, but that's an example of a case where we've been able to keep the programs together. But there really haven't been any decisions about how to deal with that at this time.
Okay, thank you. I'm in the biodiesel, renewable diesel, fuel oil world here. So we are starting to see some renewable diesel come up into the Northeast now. And a lot of it is made from eligible feedstocks, just like the biodiesel is, that's allowable in the APS program. So would it still be usable in the clean heat standard with renewable diesel or biodiesel that's made from waste feedstocks?
That's what we've put forward in the document that you'll see in the QZ and the FAQ and what I was describing, that as long as it's with waste feedstocks, it would be credited for the full displacement of the fossil fuel, and that includes whether it's renewable diesel or above a B20 blend. We just want to make sure that we're not, since that is, as you pointed out, a kind of a new thing, we don't want to encourage a new market for the fuels that aren't waste-based, since we've indicated that we may not count those after 2030. So I think the simple answer to the question you asked is yes, waste-based derived renewable diesel is what we've put forward, but with the caveat that we're looking for comment. The whole point of putting it out there is to look for comment. So we're not making a decision; we're just looking for input.
Okay, all right, great. Yeah, no, that's stuff's coming into New England now, and a lot of it's made from the waste feedstocks. Some is not, but you can get renewable diesel made from the waste feedstocks that are allowable in the APS program. The other thing, I'm trying to figure out, you guys are putting a number of $190 ACP per credit. Is that correct?
Again, everything's open for comment, but yeah, for the credits that the biofuels would be eligible for, that is the ACP that we had in the framework.
All right. Is there using $190 as a number? I'm just trying to back it down for a fuel oil company. If they did nothing, what would cost them on a per gallon basis? So I'm trying to come to those numbers, and right now it's looking to be about 30 cents a gallon or so. Does that make sense to you?
I'm not going to speak to the actual number, but I think there is a kind of compliance calculator on our website, and you're probably aware of how to think through it. One thing to keep through is it's not like a carbon price where it's that applied to all of your emissions, but it's a subset of it's a credit purchasing that's a lesser quantity of those emissions. But as I said, we have work to do on program impacts. So I don't have anything specific on the numerical part of it.
Okay, maybe we could have a little discussion at a later time on this, just so
we're
all on the same page. And
the other thing I should mention is that the alternative compliance payment is not the kind of expected credit price. It's a price to provide some signals to the market and ensure we have an adequate incentive and manage costs, but we don't know what the actual credit price would be, and that's just another piece of the consideration.
Yeah, no, I get it's not set in stone. Just trying to understand. And would a fuel oil company delivering heating oil or propane, would they be allowed to put a separate line item on the invoice for the cost of this to the consumer, so the consumer can know what the cost is?
Yeah, I don't think we would ever have any restrictions on what information could be on an invoice like that I can think of. Maybe I'm missing something, but it doesn't seem like that would be something we would restrict.
Thank you.
Chris Neem, I've asked you to unmute.
Thanks. Will, I wanted to ask a question about the idea that you're considering that you presented about limiting credit generation to no more than 5 years, and presumably to account for that, holding the annual emission reduction standard constant after 2030. Can you say I'm a little bit confused just looking at it for the first time about how that would work. To the extent emission credits are resulting from the installation of measures like full electrification of homes, with heat pumps, for example, those emission reductions are likely to last, well, at least the life of the heat pump, and 15 to 20 years, if not, forever, or as far into the future as one could imagine. So why make this adjustment? And I worry also, if you hold the emission reduction, if part of the deal to address that is to hold the emission reduction requirements constant after 2030, that might get you to the same place as under your current proposal, but only if all the emission reductions are being generated by long-lived measures, as opposed to by measures that have a 1-year life, like biofuels. But I wonder whether you would actually, unless I'm misunderstanding something, generate too few credits by holding that line constant after the first 5 years. So sorry if I'm misunderstanding.
Sure. No, I think those are fine questions. I think I'll start with, and I think as you look at the FAQ, which you may want to do, we do mention that the concern about the framework, I think, is about long-term sustainability. If you sort of say everybody's going to have a heat pump by 2050, and once you install it, you're going to get credits every year you operate, you have a situation in 2050 where sort of everybody has heat cups and everybody's getting credits, and it's not sort of doing something. So we want to have a way to kind of manage that gradual increase over time. And so we looked at, and we did acknowledge in the framework, and I think we're also concerned about making commitments that are a long term, and we want to make sure that any commitments we make we're able to honor over the life of the program. So the 5 years was a kind of a compromise, and again, very much open for comment. So I think your questions may lead to some comments we'll get about it. But the 5 years, might be enough that once somebody has actually heated their home, fully with electricity for 5 years, they're unlikely to go back even without the crediting. And so maybe crediting for a longer period is not necessary. And so, having that limited crediting may be a way to manage the long-term costs. We also note in the framework that it's easier to extend that time period later on than it would be to pull it back, because of the commitment that, we want people to sort of, one of the reasons people might do a heat pump is the idea of earning credits over some time period, and we don't want to commit for more than really makes sense for what we're actually likely to deliver in the program. So that's one part of it. And then I think the biofuels part of it is a kind of a separate question. I think that's one that probably we'd end up looking more closely if we went with what I put forward at the 2028 program review. We've floated a pretty big change in biofuels in 2030, which is that only the waste-based biofuels are eligible after that. The other thing that's happening after 2030 is, and later in the program, is that the part of the fuel supply that's generating those does decrease over time. And so that may or may not be a long-term concern, but I think it's not something that we fully addressed in what I put forward. So I hope that's maybe helpful along with the written material, and we look forward to more thoughts about that.
Okay, thanks. I'll read the FAQ for more information and mull it over and get back to you. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
June Wooding, how do utilities generate credits?
So I just want to caveat this question right from the beginning that we have flagged as one of the things we have work to do consistently, and the issue of consistency and overlap with the MassSave program, which is a utility program that's doing actions now that would generate credits. Putting that aside for the moment, although it is a big part of this question, utilities can purchase credits, and that's what they do certainly in programs that are similar to this that exist now in the sense of like the solar rooftop credits I mentioned. But they also potentially could get their consumers to take actions toward electrification that may count toward compliance with the program and earn their own credits in that way. We haven't necessarily figured out how that fits in with MassSave, but that's certainly a conceptual option also.
Michael Savage, how will natural gas cogeneration or combined heat and power be treated in the clean heat standard?
So that's in the category of things that I think we've indicated that there are some topics that we're not equipped to make a kind of final decision. There are a lot of considerations on the topic of combined heat and power, particularly if it's powered by natural gas. So it's kind of on the list we've flagged for things that during a 2028 program review, we may try and add things that have some potential, but they're not included for crediting in the framework that we've put forward now. And as I say that, I should mention that doesn't mean we've made a final decision for what goes in the draft regulation. It's just our current thinking as we've communicated in the framework and the other documents.
Michaela Nielsen, what would happen if the obligated heating energy providers can't demonstrate that they have earned enough or the required clean heat credits?
Right. So Christine mentioned that this is building on success with other programs and using a mechanism called an alternative compliance payment. And basically the idea there is if you're a regulated company, you sort of have two ways of complying. You might think if you don't have enough credits that you're out of compliance, but that's not really what the regulation would say. It would say there's an alternative, which is to purchase these alternative compliance payments, and you make a payment. And the idea is that that payment is something that we could use to achieve additional clean heat and make up for whatever deficit led to the payment.
Robert Rio, what about the fuels that weren't going to be reviewed until 2028? Hydrogen, renewable natural gas?
I'm not quite sure the question. We don't have anything to announce today about that. We are, considering all past comments, and we've certainly gotten comments on both sides of that issue. I guess one update I could give is that there is another piece of the puzzle that we just put out today, and we'll, I think, probably talk about over the next month, which is whether in industrial commercial settings, whether we might have some ability to use alternative fuels as long as they're not coming through the pipeline system. As people know, there's been some concerns about crediting the use of the pipeline system toward clean heat as a regarding long-term sustainability, but there is that piece that we may end up looking at differently. So you could stay tuned for that part of it. And there's a document posted on our website now.
Stephen Sack, I've asked you to unmute.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question. It sounds like, maybe DEEP is looking to eliminate heating oil and biodiesel, renewable diesel, liquid, basically liquid deliverable fuel, renewable from the entire heating sector in mass and wants full electrification. you know, it's a great thing to do, but you know, in order to be able to do that, the entire grid has to be redone throughout all New England with ISO New England, and a lot of new green electricity production has to be built. So, you know, looking at that, it's a long ways off. The winter time is going to be the biggest burden on the grid system. So why wouldn't DEEP support staying with, you know, very low carbon fuels for the heating sector to take strain off of the grid system that can't handle it nor make green electricity?
I don't think I can fully address probably your concerns about the grid at this particular meeting, except to say that we do, one of the things that we've built into the proposal is a program review regularly, including one quite early in the program, which is 2028. You know, I would also say on the liquid biofuels, we already have made a bit of a diversion from past state policy around the eligibility, where we're talking about limiting crediting for the fuels that may not be waste-based, but are currently being used by consumers and have been identified by EPA in California as reducing emissions. And we've you know, recognized that. And so that's another topic we've noted for potential reconsideration in 2028. So I think we're trying to strike a balance and you know, recognizing the potential for biofuels, but certainly we also are part of an overall state initiative, as you know, toward electrification being the prime way we will get the clean heat in the long term.
Just to add to that, so those of you who've been following the Clean Energy and Climate Plan and our climate goals that are part of the state statute, we are required to hit certain targets or goals. And the first goal is 2030. So it's 50% below 1990 and 2030. So we're trying to calibrate how this program rolls out with those climate goals, ultimately out to net zero in 2050. So it will be a program that does gradually build up to more electrification, as Will said, but we are building in the you know, crediting certain biofuels. And there are many other policies and programs into the Clean Energy and Climate Plan that do address the electricity sector and making sure that there's enough capacity on the system to fuel not only cars becoming electric, but also as buildings become more electrified. So this is what I mean to say is that there's a whole suite of policies that the Commonwealth is pursuing that are complementary and work together.
Chris Neem, is there a date by which you want any feedback on the possible modifications you've described today? That date, I believe, is April 5th.
Right.
June Wooding, will there be consideration towards different credits for air source heat pumps versus ground source heat pumps and networked geothermal, since both are more efficient than air source heat pumps?
Yeah, at this point, the framework doesn't distinguish between them because of their similar emission reduction potential. There are, as people are aware, probably other state programs that may provide additional support for example, geothermal heat pumps. So we're happy to take that as a comment that we might think about that, but at this point, the framework that we put forward doesn't make that distinction.
I'm not seeing any additional comments in the chat or raised hands. Chris Neem, I've asked you to unmute.
Thanks. Just a maybe indirect follow-up to a question I asked earlier, and related to the change to the proposed and possible change to the 5 years for credits. Under the current framework and under this proposed change, would the use of a biofuel, those that are eligible, count as a credit just in the year in which the biofuel is consumed? Or is that how it works in terms of credit assignment?
Yes.
So it's a 1 year credit in essence. If you sell a biofuel in 2027, you get a credit, however many credits that's worth, just in the 2027 calendar year, and then you'd have to sell it again and
Yes.
2028
Yep.
credit.
That's the concept. Yep.
Okay. So in that context, limiting in the new proposal to go to 5 years for credits for capital measures like heat pumps, you would be shifting from a situation where a biofuel credit for certain, for a ton of emission reductions is worth 1 ton for 1 year, and a heat pump that produced emission reductions would get that same amount of credit, but only for five years, as opposed to under the previously proposed or currently proposed system, it would be for 25 years.
Yes, I think the biofuel crediting would stay the same. The heat pump crediting would change as you described. So the reason the standard wouldn't increase in the long term is that some of those heat pumps from the early years would be no longer eligible each year. So we wouldn't want the standard to keep increasing over time. And I think you're correctly pointing out we may have some further thinking through if we think this is a good idea around how the biofuel crediting fits in with that concept. I think that's a point well taken.
Yeah, I'm just to say it out loud a little bit. I'm just worried that if you had a measure that you actually really expect to provide emission reductions for 25 years versus one that you expect to provide reductions for 1 year, if the credits associated with that heat pump were sold on the market when they can earn 25 years worth of credits, the price difference would shrink a lot if you said they were only worth now 5 years worth of credits, artificially shrink.
Well, this may be a little bit beyond the scope of this, but let me just try add one little bit to your thinking about this. So this is the ongoing heat pump operational credits.
Mm-hmm.
The concept in the framework sort of assumes that people aren't going to simply install heat pumps because of the motivation to get credits out into the future. So that's why we have the additional full electrification standard that requires crediting for a certain number of full electrification projects every year. Mm-hmm. And that wouldn't be affected by this change. This would just apply to the ongoing credits. So sure. I take your point, but that's one of the reasons we have the full electrification thing, is just so that's not necessarily the decisive piece of it.
Great point. There are two credit values that you could sell into a market. The first one would be unaffected by this change. The second one would be, so that dilutes the effect on the relative difference in value of the two different kinds of credits, but it doesn't eliminate it. So I'm just thinking out loud a little bit, but appreciate the back and forth.
Yeah, we're happy to hear, have you think about it over the next month or so and tell us a little more.
Michael Savage, a follow-up on cogeneration. Will all the gas that's used be included in the regulated gas utilities volume? So will the gas that goes into cogeneration be subject to the clean heat standard, where since part of the gas goes to the power sector and part to thermal sector, will it be split?
So the proposal regulates all the gas that goes through the distribution system. So in general, that would include gas that's used in combined heat power or any other use. Just want to be careful a little bit though, because the power generation comes out kind of directly out of the transmission network normally, so it wouldn't be actually included in those totals.
Stephen Cowell, if you combine a heat pump with solar to produce 100% of the climate benefits, would this get a separate standard?
No, you'd maybe get some benefits from the solar and the heat pump separately, but it wouldn't be a different thing.
I'm not seeing any other comments or raised hands. Ben Butterworth, I've asked you to unmute.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm kind of just reacting to the FAQ updates in real time, but I see the statement, consider assigning default ownership of emissions reduction credits from operation of heat pumps to electricity suppliers instead of homeowners. So a question about that, so let's say a heating oil delivery company installed a heat pump. Where are the emissions reduction credits being assigned? That statement seems to imply the emissions reduction credits would be assigned to the electricity supplier.
Yeah, so the and this relates to, maybe it's worth saying a little bit with the previous question. So there's sort of two separate things going on here. One is the full electrification standard, which we think very much infects those installer companies, and the homeowner has the sort of first right of ownership to those, but they can sign it over to the installer, which they may do to sell the credits. Separately, there's this ongoing standard, which may help to encourage some people to install a heat pump, but it's not really intended to be the primary driver. It's more intended to deal with making sure that the heat pumps are operated once they're installed, and those emission reductions are counted in the crediting scheme. So what we floated here in the framework, it basically says the homeowner would sort of be the primary owner of those credits that are generated over time and control them. And, in your example, they might sign them over to the installer or something. But we floated in the framework an idea that the way we would verify operation of heat pumps, in addition maybe to some kind of attestation or something, is by looking at electricity bills and looking for a kind of winter peaking pattern. And so the idea there is that maybe if that's how we're going to verify electricity, heat pump usage anyway, having those companies, setting it up so those companies can kind of earn the credits and sell them into market is really the best way to create an incentive structure that encourages people to operate their heat pumps. And it also would create a self-consistent thing where the energy supplier would be the provider of those ongoing annual reduction credits. So whether they be biofuels or heat pump operation, also emission reductions from industrial commercial sources, they would be traded in that same kind of trading market. Does that help? There is a lot to think through there. So. I don't need an answer on that question, so we can see whether there's others.
There's no other raised hands or comments, unless Ben, you have another comment.
I think I understood that. Yeah, I'm just imagining like a full electrification project performed by an electricity supplier or obtained by an electricity supplier, and then the emissions reduction credits going to them in 2027, 2028 when they don't have an emissions reduction obligation. Right, and then they could sell those into the market. So anyway, I'm just thinking through it out loud, but that explanation helped.
Right. And I'd also say we are open for questions and comments to our climate strategy email address anytime, and do anticipate that we may not, but we may add some additional to the FAQ over time as we get questions. So there's also that option as we go through toward that April 5th deadline.
You advanced the slide, Emily, which is there we go. So I think because we don't have any other comments, I will remind folks we do have another call or virtual meeting tonight at 6 p.m. It's pretty much the same presentation. And we truly thank you all for your engagement. We've had great engagement, lots of great questions for us to think through. And we appreciate that. So with that, I think we will end, and we may see some of you back at 6 p.m. But again, we welcome comments at any time, and we're looking for the next round of comments by April 5th. With that, again, thank you for coming, and we will see some of you at 6.